Hello, everybody, and welcome to the next Best at Work webinar. My name is Jaime Raul Zepeda. I'm the Executive Vice President and Principal Consultant at Best Companies Group. I welcome all of you here today. We have quite a few people coming in, and we actually expect a big crowd for this webinar. I guess a lot of us are really trying to figure out how do we make our teams more productive, right? So before we get started, I would love for all of you that are here right now in the chat just to start making some great connections, because that's one of the things that we try to do here is create community through the webinar, is to share in the chat where you're coming from. You can just say like city or state. And this is where you gotta give it a little bit of thought. What is the movie that you always recommend to someone? If they say, have you seen any good movies recently or any good movies that you recommend I watch? It's always one of those you're like, you gotta watch this one in case you haven't already. All right. And it's coming in right now. I saw Interstellar, whoever said that, 100%. It is actually, don't get me started on movies now. Interstellar, there's a theory that it's actually all about parenthood and what happens when a parent dies. Because many people think that Matthew McConaughey's character is actually obviously the father, but the father passed away coming back to visit his daughter later on when she's about to die. So just theory out there in case you didn't know about that. Sixth Sense, great stuff. Rochester, welcome Rochester. All right, well let's keep it coming because we have almost 200 people in attendance right now. We're probably going to get about double of that by the time that we end. So let's create some great community by connecting here. All right. So let me get started with a quick story. And please keep coming, bringing in on the chat where you're coming in from. And this story, if any of you follow me on LinkedIn, yep, it's showing. If any of you follow me on LinkedIn, you saw this about a week ago. So about a week ago, almost exactly, my 9-year-old boy went back to fourth grade for his first day of school, right for fourth grade. He went back to school, started fourth grade. A lot of nervousness because new kids, old friends are no longer there. A lot of change, right? A lot of change happening. And what he needed in that time, which I think anybody here who's a parent, anybody here who's a parent that just dropped off their kid for first day of school back realizes is just to really be there, right? Just to be there and help guide him, help nurture him, help support him in some way. Nothing really else. It's pretty easy, at least to me, being a dad. It is incredibly easy being a dad because you know exactly what you need to do. You know what your purpose is. You know what your why is. And so it makes anything that you have to do to become a really good parent really easy. You know what you need to do and you know why you want to do it. And that is connected to what we're going to talk about today because part of the reason that a lot of our employees are not as productive, not as engaged, not as locked in and aligned to the work that we're doing is because for a lot of them it is unclear why they're doing what they're doing and what they actually need to do. That is one of the reasons that productivity is slipping. So we don't have a laziness problem when we talk about productivity. It's a map problem. Okay, the map on how to get things done and why to get things done is the problem. There's barely half of people that truly understand what their responsibilities are. And these people, more often than not, are smart, they're motivated, they're human beings that want to do really good work. But what happens is that the ambiguity in their work is what ends up becoming the tax that all of us pay every hour by being there and being less engaged than we could be. If your best people right now are walking around asking, who owns this? Then they're not really doing the work. They're navigating the fog that's around them. If they're wondering, why is this important? And what's the point of this work that I'm doing? They're in the fog, right? Clarity beats cleverness every single time, and ownership beats effort. There's a additional hidden tax for any of you out there that are small or medium businesses. When you factor in how much is lost because of lost productivity, you realize that it can really add up. 40% of people's day, if it's the typical roles that we have out there, 40% of their day is doing skilled work that they've been trained on, that they have experience on. The rest, 60%, is on chasing updates, duplicating effort, getting clarifying information because it didn't make sense the first time. When you add that up for a 100-person organization, that's about 1.25 million dollars being burned, right? You're just putting 1.25 million dollars of cash in a pile, soaking it in gasoline and lighting it up. That's essentially the hidden tax of lost productivity for a small organization, and then you just a medium organization, so you just multiply that for any larger organization, it's the same thing. If you are an HR leader, you are also now the CFO of attention within your organization. And the bucket right now for attention is very, very leaky. One more time in the chat, let's check in real quick. I would love to hear from you. Why do you think productivity is not where it should be at your organization? What is getting in the way of your organization, your teams, your people being as productive as they could be today? All right, let me go back to the chat. Communication, accountability, that is a big one. Communication one more time. Overwhelm, I'm seeing a lot of that. Yep, a lot of need to be trusted, burnout. And a lot of that is what we're going to talk about today, right? And as you can see, if you're following the chat too, communication, overwhelm comes up a lot. And overwhelm is easy to kick in our brains, which are still an amazing computer, but a computer that can sometimes be hijacked. It can come up more often when you don't know why something's happening, when you don't know why something's important. Go back to the parenting example I mentioned. When you know why you're doing something and the importance of what you're doing, you're still going to do tough stuff. It makes it a lot easier to do it though, because you don't have to ask the why for yourself. You just have to do it. And that is a lot easier than doing something hard and also looking around thinking like, why are we even doing this? So there's usually three culprits around clarity. And we're going to talk about the other part that gets in the way of productivity, which is friction in a second. But when we're talking about clarity and understanding what it is that we're doing and why, there's usually three culprits, and they are unclear goals, unclear roles, and unclear signals. So for goals, if the definition of success isn't defined clearly up front, then you're asking for rework down the line. If your roles, if there are two owners equal with no clear ownership on the task, then the collaboration is going to diffuse into just a masquerade of inefficiency. And then finally, signals. If you have inconsistent channels where updates are not clear and rumors become the currency of what's happening, you're dragging your productivity down. So, what you're going to learn today is that the solution for a lot of this stuff and the reason why a lot of this stuff is happening is quite boring, right? There's nothing here that you're going to hear say, oh, well, that's the one thing nobody's ever thought about. It's very simple and it's very boring, but it's very important. The boringness in this, whether it's the solution or the cause, it's the superpower for someone that can, take that and actually work on that stuff. So you need to focus on how do we clearly define what success looks like, what done looks like? How do we lay down roles with clarity and responsibility in one page? How do we get to the point where we can provide that? How do we get to a point where we have a single source of truth for what happened, what needs to happen, and how did it go? Those are really going to be some of the solutions we're going to talk about today. So it's nothing very sexy or very earth-shattering. Very boring, incredibly important. Now, the other part of it is friction. Coordination is crowding out creation. And so let me say a little bit more about what I mean by that. The push for hybrid or remote work doubled the amount of lack of clarity that we saw because there's no more hallway serendipity going on. What I mean by that is if you were here in 2019, right? Remember that time before COVID? If you're here in 2019 and you were unclear about something, if you bumped into someone that was doing similar work or ideally was the decision maker or owner of that work, you could get clarity right there, right then, in that hallway, on that site, on that line. Hey, you have 1 minute to tell me again. I'm not sure I understand why we got to change the way that we do this. I think I get it, but can you walk me through it? Oh, okay. Well, yeah, you see what happened was, and then you go from there. We don't have that anymore for a lot of organizations. If you have hybrid employees, if you have remote employees, it is double the dip around clarity that you're probably seeing, right? There's also ineffective communication. It is creating a hidden cost that is estimated around $15,000 per employee. And this is where there's too much noise. There's too much noise to find out what is the real signal here. What am I really supposed to focus on rather than focusing on everything? A little side note here, I just did a training with an organization a management training with an organization that was struggling with communication. And one of their questions was, we do so much to communicate, and yet our employees, when we talk to them, they still look at us like, what are you talking about? What update? I didn't get that email. And so we're thinking, why don't they care about the communication that we send out? And my question back to them was, do you think it's because they don't care or because they care so much that they're taking in so much information, they don't know what to do with all of it? And they don't know what's actually important. Maybe you're communicating so much with no clear understanding of what is important versus what is just information, what is just, an update, what is actually something you want them to work on, that they take in everything and they don't know what to work with. Sometimes it's not so much that they don't care, it's that they care too much that they can't filter out the signal from the noise. So a quick story of there was this organization that had two trucks and they were making a delivery to the same address. They're a small organization, about 60 persons, 60 people, and they shipped the order using the trucks twice because they didn't communicate with each other. So they both had a similar order, went to the same address. They looked at each other and realized, what are you doing here? Because they realized they hadn't communicated with each other. Who owns this delivery, right? And so time was lost, customer trust was dented. The fix they ended up going with later on, much later after this happened many, many times, again, incredibly boring, but incredibly effective, was a RACI document. So if anybody's familiar with RACIs, essentially lays out responsibility, accountability, consulting, and who's consultant and who's informed, and a 10-minute huddle to go through the day's orders, right? That cut down all of these accidental mishaps and made it a lot easier for everybody to be on the same page. If that's happened to you, you probably understand the pain that comes in when you realize that you could have fixed something very easily if you'd taken an extra step to clarify things. Let's talk about managers. They are the upgrade in your organization, the software upgrade that is halfway through being installed, right? A lot of managers are great managers. A lot of managers are, let's call it what it is, mediocre managers. And there's a small percentage that are pretty bad managers. Okay. And if you're not tapping into the power of your manager, you're not going to be able to multiply the impact of your team. Weekly, meaningful feedback is a huge game changer for engagement. Top quartile engagement correlates with double-digit lifts in productivity and profitability. One more time, I say this every time that I have a webinar with you all. These are numbers that you can take back to your COO, your CEO, or CFO and say, this is what we're losing if we don't focus on improving the engagement of our employees. We're talking about productivity, we're talking about dollars, right? A 5-minute clarity chat between an employee and a manager outperforms all the fancy dashboards that you could put out there. It doesn't even compare. And if you just use a very simple script, like talking about specific behaviors, talking about the impact of that behavior, and talking about what to do next time, which we call feed forward, then you compound that growth over time because your people continue to become better. The translation here is that clarity delivered by a human being, ideally that person being the manager, beats any other dashboard or tool that you can find. So what is it that great managers do? What is it that they do is that makes them so amazing and great? Nothing very earth-shattering here. These are some of the things, though, that we've seen that great managers do, and we have data to back it up that proves to lift engagement, lift productivity, and lift profitability for the organization. Weekly one-on-ones with a standing agenda. Ideally, the agenda created by the employee. The agenda is not created by the manager, but the agenda is created by the employee so that the signal is the employee, you own your success. I'm here to support you every step of the way. I'm here to answer your questions. I'm here to be your soundboard. I'm here to provide clarity, but I need you to step through that door first. And you step through that door by setting the agenda and telling me what we need to talk about. Talking about what success looks like. There were two teams that I used to actually manage a few early on in my career, many years ago, where there's very toxic energy between them when I initially led them due to a lot of things that happened before me that just were never really addressed. One of those was the definition of success. The definition of success for one team was we do everything the client tells us because we want to make the client happy. And the definition of success for the other team was we do everything by the book to make sure that we are efficient and accurate. There's a lot of overlap in those two things, but because they were taking such extreme definitions of success, they saw each other as the enemy and everybody suffered, including the customer. So you got to think about, are there clear definitions of success across the teams in the organization? And do they overlap enough for us to feel like that also creates success for the organization itself, not just the teams? So fast feedback. This is really important. You want to give feedback as quickly as possible after something happens. The only asterisk you would add to that is if there's emotions involved. If you are emotional or they are emotional, in a negative way, typically, because something happened, do not talk about it at that point. Give it a beat. Wait a day. Talk the next day. If there's no emotion, if there's just like a clear, hey, you know what? The way that you handled the conversation with the client did really well. I think it was very clear for them. I did notice that you interrupted the client a few times, and that made the client feel like we are not respecting their input. Next time, I would like you to let them finish to make sure that we have a real conversation. That's feedback right there, right then and there. Not emotional, just focused on the behavior, focused on the impact, and then ideally focused on the feed forward. Here's what I want you to do next time. That's always the best way of moving forward rather than just looking backwards. And then last thing I'll say here is clear, concise, and contextual communication. What I mean by that is it gives people the information they need when they need it with clarity. You want to make sure that your communication does not live in a silo. You're not sending out messages that live in their own silo. You're telling a story. It just happens to be the organization story. And the organization story is full of initiatives, strategies, updates. How are we doing? Metrics to share, celebrations of people following the strategies or making the strategy successful, behaviors they want to see. These are all stories. And as much as boring as we might think the update might be, it's part of a story. And if you can contextualize that as a story, it's a lot easier for someone to take that in, understand it, and be inspired by it. So one thing I'll say here is, again, I mentioned this earlier, is we have our management fundamentals bootcamp where we talk a lot about this stuff. The Management Fundamentals Bootcamp talks about four things that we spend a whole day just workshopping and being very interactive on. We talk about the manager's mindset. What does a manager do to multiply the success of their team that is different from what they did when they were a sole individual contributor? We talk about recognition that is effective and personalized. We also talk about the brain science behind recognition and feedback, where it's a lot easier for someone to change their behavior if you create an environment and feedback that sparks dopamine in their brain. Dopamine is a feel-good hormone, right? If anybody here runs, works out, does something that you really get a lot of pleasure out of, that feel-good emotion after you do it, that's dopamine. And dopamine goes into your brain, and essentially it's a tiny little signal that says, repeat this. It felt good. It's another reason why our phones are so addictive, because dopamine is wired into social media, into the way the phones are done. So we talk about dopamine and how important that is to recognizing someone and how important that is to making sure they repeat that behavior in the future. We also talk about communication, and we talk about different hacks that we found that make communication extremely clear and concise and compel action. We also talk about a framework of how to develop messages that stick and answer all the questions for people. And then we go into coaching and feedback. And we go and play with all of these pieces together, playing out scenarios of what kind of situations do you see in your organization, in your teams, where these tools could be developed. So if you're interested in doing that, we're going to talk more about that later. But it is something that we're really proud of and sharing. And it's all about the fundamentals in creating a great manager based on us researching thousands of organizations throughout the years. So one more time, going back to our SMB friends here, small and medium organizations, because they do have a different, more complex reality when we look at productivity. Now, there's a few things, right, that show up here for small and medium organizations that show up for them more than other organizations that you can fix in just a few ways. And we're going to talk about some of the tips that we can do that here. But the reality is that usually there's overlapping roles that are not super clear and create some confusion. Best case, they create confusion. Worst case, they create a lot of rework and potential toxicity between teams, between roles. Sometimes there's not enough clarity of where the map lives, who's in the org map, and who's responsible for what, right? Again, small and medium organizations typically are a little scrappier. They don't have as many, robust tools as large organizations. So sometimes even the org map and the roles and definitions and job descriptions are harder to understand. And the other thing is overwhelm. There's usually too many things, too many works in progress going on, and there's not an ability to really look into what happened and how do we do that better in the future. So one of the things that you've said in previous webinars that you really, really appreciate is whenever we go into super tactical things that you all can do right after we're done with this webinar to improve the issue we're discussing. So moving forward here for the next few slides, these are all super tactical tips that you can just swipe and use in your organization. If you have questions on any of these, please drop them in the chat or in the Q&A section, and I'll answer them at the end. So the first one, naming the decider. Speed isn't magic, but it does have a certain kind of architecture. So one human being must own the call for something. There needs to be boundaries to the debate, and there needs to be someone that can kind of pull in the calendar so it doesn't sprawl into a million and one meetings. One of the things that we recommend is to use frameworks like Rapid or RACI. These are frameworks that tell you or that force you to lay out for projects, teams, or even cross teams who owns the decision for this, who is accountable for the success of this, who should be consulted before we move forward on something, and who should be informed after we've moved forward on something. Okay, this exercise of always looking at the decider will help things move a lot faster and have more clarity. One of the ways that you can realize or you can find out if you have a decider problem is ask a team, any team that you have, and say, okay, what's the most common situation that comes up here? Give me a couple. They'll give you a couple. And then for each of those, say, okay, when this happens, who decides what happens when there's no clear answer? And if you have people looking at each other for a while and kind of shuffling in their seats and, kind of giving nervous laughs, that tells you you have a decider problem, right? And some people might think, well, that's not very collaborative. That's not the kind of our style. And I would disagree because a decider is not someone that goes in there and just says, this is how we do it because I said so. A good decider makes it clear what the decision-making guidelines are. Are we doing consensus? Am I accepting input and then deciding? Am I just telling you what I'm going to decide? Makes that clear early on, and then follows through on it to make sure that everybody has a voice in some way, either in shaping it or in hearing what happened and providing their feedback. It can still be very, very collaborative, but you do need to have someone who decides on the top reoccurring decisions. If anybody's familiar with OKRs, you realize that they're very helpful and they're a very helpful framework in translating strategy to priorities to work. And if you can keep them focused on just a few OKRs per team and a few measurable key results, that's what the KR is for, so it's objective key results, then you will have a lot of success because it gives you an opportunity to talk about the why. The OKRs all start with why are we even doing this? What's the objective of measuring this work, doing this work? And that's the objective that you define. That's your why. And if you do this on a monthly or even quarterly basis, you're going to do a lot to recalibrate the focus of your teams. And if you want to find out more about how do I even get started, there's thankfully a lot of free resources on OKRs. You just Google OKR guide. There's even some at the very top that I've seen recently that give you the full playbook absolutely for free. So drift, if any of you have heard that word, is when things just kind of go on and on because there's no clear alignment of what should be done or how things are going. And it can be very quiet, unfortunately, very expensive, and it can create a lot of havoc. All right. You can cure this by just doing a few things. Host a 45-minute, or ask your leaders to host a 45-minute cross-functional stop, start, and continue conversation. Stop. What are the things that we're doing that are not working and are actually hurting us, and we need to stop as quickly as possible? Start. What are some things that we haven't tried yet and we should give it a shot and do that? Continue. What are some things that are clearly working? We don't do enough of them, or we do, but we were thinking about stopping it and we should carry on with it. All right. It helps talk about just the work and take things away from being political where things are only happening because somebody said so. It's a group conversation that decides what you stop, what you start, and what you continue. The other thing is you can publish what these things are to create some nice transparency and public accountability through a 5 bullet recap. And you can do that within 24 hours and get a lot of clarity across the organization. One more thing here is team role charters. In the chat, just feel free to let me know real quick. Do you currently use something like this? I have started to see more team role charters showing up, especially in teams that have a lot of dependency with other teams. And so team role charters is where you end up using some of the frameworks that I mentioned, like a RACI or a Rapid. There's a few others that you can do there. And this is meant to be a document that gets created with everybody and then shared and is public so that anybody can just look at it and say, okay, if the decision is about this, then I go to Betty. If the decision is about that, I go to John. There's no politics here. There's no who is the favorite. There's no who raised their hands first. It is a agreement across the team. It's essentially like having a team roster, saying who's the point guard, who's the center, and then just following through on that. It creates a lot of clarity and it helps also resolve conflicts really, really fast. One more time in the chat. I'd love to hear from all of you, and let's share with each other. What do you think is the number one reason for broken handoffs right now? By broken handoffs, I mean lack of collaboration between teams, lack of transfer of work from one team to another when they depend on each other's success. It could even be lack of communication between both of them. What do you think is creating this broken handoff dynamic within your organization? All right. So too many people think they need to be involved. Absolutely. Using email instead of in-person conversations. Absolutely. Lack of clarity, unclear expectations, communication. Yeah, you're seeing a lot of the same things over and over, right? You're seeing that communication is not clear, and sometimes communication is a little too, I would say, incomplete, where it's just an email or it's just a chat, and everybody knows, you know what, this really would have merited a 5 minute phone call, and everybody would have saved ourselves a lot of time and headache versus sending 15 emails back and forth over 4 days. It's just, unfortunately, the shortcuts are not really shortcuts at all. So rework is another surcharge, right? That comes into play when we're thinking about productivity. One of the ways that you can do this is, as we mentioned earlier, is define success before the work starts. For example, schedule, or I'm sorry, define what you believe is the acceptance criteria. And the acceptance criteria is, what do we think will make what we're doing acceptable to the next stage? Is it something, for example, are we putting together a document or a report and we want to make sure that all the numbers and the grammar and the layout is perfect? Okay, that's the acceptance criteria. Let's make sure that that is now what we define as success. Is it, um, you know, we're on an assembly line and our part of the work needs to pass our all quality checks before we can pass it on to the next part of the assembly line? That's your success metric. If you assume that they know what it is, they might not. They likely won't know what it is. And that lack of definition is going to create a lot of chaos later on and a lot of rework overall. Making work visible is something truly magical because our brains are geared towards grabbing stuff, seeing stuff, having it materialize in some way. So, one of the ways you can do this in your organization very easily is just get a board, any board out there. It could be a flip chart, it could be like an actual, board that you had there that you previously used for something else, and use that to lay out the work or tell your managers this is how you can lay out the work for your teams. And one easy, straightforward framework that you can use to do that is you can divide the work into backlog, something that has not been discussed or assigned yet, in progress, and complete. And then if you want to go even fancier, you can have a last one that says, or one that cuts across, but next to it, that says blocked. Backlog means we got to discuss this as a team. We had this order come in. We haven't decided who's going to work on it yet. Let's have a conversation and assign it. In progress means somebody took that body of work and says, I'm working on it right now. I'll let you know how it goes. Complete is complete. And then blocked means I started it, but something happened along the way that now I don't know how to finish it. Those kind of visuals help people orient themselves a lot better. It also takes stuff out of their brain. Because when you don't have something visual, that's one of the reasons why writing stuff down is so important and why to-do lists are so effective, is when you don't write stuff down or you put it out of your brain in some way, it stays in there as a constant loop that's just sapping energy and sapping attention because it's not outside of your brain, right? So that's another way of creating some clarity for your people. And here's a script that you can pass on to your managers for them to check in on this kind of work, right? And reduce the amount of drift that we see out there in 3 questions in just 20 minutes tops. First, the manager would ask, what are your top three priorities this week? What are you working on right now? And the things that you think you absolutely must complete by the end of the week. That question by itself will yield a lot of clarity because the manager might find out, I have no idea why you're working on those things because those are not that important at all. Let's reset that and talk about the real priorities. All right, so just even that can yield a lot of great information. Next, what's in the way? What's blocking you? What's an obstacle that we had not thought about before so I can help you in some way, either by removing the obstacle, by elevating this and having a larger conversation because maybe other people are facing the same thing, or by helping you how to go around the obstacle. And then lastly, how can I help? And this question is meant to be as broad as possible. Another way of saying this is how can I help you be successful? Or what do you need from me? And that's where the employee can think and say, well, I would really appreciate it if you gave me this information. You connected me with so and so. You brought this up to the next level up so we can have a process conversation. These three questions will help supercharge the amount of productivity that your team has. We already talked about feedback and the importance of why feedback is so important, or the importance of why feedback is so crucial to be delivered as soon as possible after it happens. One last thing that I'll share here is you also want to provide feedback when things are going really well. And this means you celebrate not just your top performers. You should definitely continue to celebrate your top performers. Top performers love celebration and recognition. But you also want to spread it out a little more and look at people who are progressing, who are getting better over time. Okay. This is what will yield a lot of benefit down the line because you'll have your emerging talent, your emerging leaders be more and more emboldened to take bigger and bigger roles. You're recognizing their progress, not just their perfection. Let's talk about the brain science real quick. Why is it so hard for people to deal with uncertainty? Here's an exercise that I think summarizes everything that's here for all of you. Just think about. If I were to tell you right now, or just imagine this scenario. Let's say that you're in this webinar and all of a sudden you get a text from your spouse, partner, a loved one, and they say hello, and then you respond back, "Hey, how's it going?" And you see that they read the message, but they don't respond for a few minutes, maybe 30 minutes, maybe a few hours, and it's the end of the day and you haven't heard back from them. Where does your brain go? Your brain probably doesn't go to, I'm sure everything's fine, nothing to worry about. You probably go to the worst case scenario, right? Or at least one of the worst case scenarios. You start to panic, you start to worry. Because what the brain does when it has a lack of information is 99% of the time, it thinks about the worst case scenario to prepare you for safety, right? Just to keep you safe in some way. And this is what happens for your teams too. When they're being asked to work on something and it's not super clear why they're working on it, number one. Two, what they're doing. Or three, when will it be done? What's the measure of success? They drift off into the worst case scenario, or they end up just thinking about something that does provide more certainty, which is not the work that they're doing. This is the importance of providing clarity and also providing some short horizon goals so that they keep moving forward. If you're asking them to do some work that will take some time, break it up into smaller pieces, milestones that will help them stay motivated and focused if the road forward is long. Very quickly here, because I want to make sure I cover everything else that we have, is another piece on brain science is that there's a lot of taxes on your brain when you're doing a lot of different things. The whole idea of multitasking is a myth. Some of you may disagree with me and say, I'm a great multitasker. I am sure you are great at doing many things in a short amount of time. That does not mean you are multitasking because the brain can't multitask. What the brain does is that it switches between the different tasks you're doing like this, back and forth, multiple times in nanoseconds. And that does a few things. One, it splits your brain's power and attention into many things. So you're not doing everything as well as you could. And come on, let's be honest, between you and me, you know that's true. And it also leaves you taxed as more so than if you were to do all the things in sequence, separate, right, one by one. Who here has done multitasking or feel like they've done 30 minutes of multitasking and been exhausted by the end of 30 minutes? But then when you look at a full day where you did chunks of work, of deep work all at once, and the long day was, or the day was longer than the multitask 30 minutes, you actually feel all right. That's why multitasking is taxing your brain. And it's also worse, this is for your people, not letting you focus on things as well as you should. Last thing here on brain science, before we go into more tips, is the importance of coaching is that it requires people to find their own answers. The brain, when the brain is asked some questions to help it find its own answers, does a lot more work than when it's given information. And what helps is that it retains more of that work in their brain. This is the reason why the Socratic method is so popular in college. A lot of questions. What do you think happens? What should we do next? What are the implications of that? The student, the other person, is able to work those mechanisms in their brain, keep that knowledge for longer, and become smarter because of it. It is much more powerful than just giving them the answers of, hey, if I were you and you're bumping into this and Bill didn't get back to you on that, go talk to Betty and then let her know that she's got to get back to you because of, the SOP we did last week. They have not learned that. They know what to do, and sometimes that is the right approach, especially when there's deadlines, but they are not getting stronger. They are not learning through the coaching. Now, if you have a hybrid workplace, these are some things that you should look into to ensure that everybody's clear and everybody's as productive as they should be. We already talked about a couple of these, like the single source of truth. That is incredibly important, especially when you can't rely on people as much as if you were in the office. The other one is working agreements. Now, this is something that fell off a lot because people after COVID and after hybrid and remote work became so popular because people assumed that everybody just knew how to work together, but they don't. We know they don't, right? So you need to talk about working agreements on response times. If I send you a Slack or a Teams or an email and you are working from home, I still expect you to respond within that business day or within 24 hours. Make it clear in what that is. What do we use each channels for, like on Teams or Slack? What do we use them for? Is there an etiquette around what they're about? And then meeting etiquette. This is a big one. Not along silently wherever you are. How many of you have way too many people on Zoom meetings with their cameras off, right? And you and your leadership team know, like, I don't like that. What are they doing? Why are the cameras off? But for the people, some of them may know, like, I know I'm not supposed to, but whatever, I'm going to do it. For others, they're like, well, I'm one out of 200 people on this meeting. I'm sure nobody cares that my camera's off, right? Because I'm doing emails while I'm on this meeting, or I'm driving to a client while I'm on this meeting. Nobody cares that my camera's off. So if that is something that's important to you and your organization, make it clear that that is a working agreement. Things are different now. People have different environments, so you have to come to their environment and help them have the right kind of arrangement. For any of you that have been in my webinars, you know this was about to happen. I love bears. They're the best. And I just thought this was really funny. That's it. There's no real reason for this outside of that. Um, and who knows, maybe the bears really do think we're soft tacos. um, you want to measure what you're trying to improve. And here are a couple of things that matter when we're looking at productivity, right? These are things like throughput by full-time employees, cycle time, like how quickly does something take from beginning to end, on time delivery rate, first pass quality, meaning things got done perfectly the first time somebody, a proofer or another team checked the quality of it. You can even have questions in your survey that talk about clarity. I know what's expected of me in my role. How is that score doing? Survey over survey. And then just more qualitatively is hear from managers. Like, what are you hearing from your team? Are people saying something about the way that we do our work and our output and our productivity? And make sure that you tune into something like that. And if you want to take it a little bit further, here's some formulas that can help you find out what these things are, like throughput, cycle time, on-time delivery, first pass quality. I'll stay here for a second in case you want to jot any of these down, and then I'll move on. All right, one quick story here. There was a SaaS team that I worked with where they were having trouble assigning work to people, and this was creating a lot of just dead time where people were waiting for assignments and they weren't sure what to work on. So what they did is something, again, very boring, but very effective. Each morning, each person would post their top three priorities and one blocker. They would have their meeting and they would post it. Either they would share it in an email if everybody was remote, or they would have like a board where they line it up. And then the manager, in front of everybody with everybody else, they would coach. Okay, tell me why you think that's a top priority, or tell me what have you done to get around that blocker. They would not command and control. They would coach in front of everybody, and they would make sure that if somebody was putting in more than three things, he would cap it off. It's like we can't have more than three priorities. So what are the things that we can push off to next week, right? And this improved first pass quality and made the team much more effective. In order to have something stick, whatever you end up picking, right, that you want your organization to do now moving forward to improve its productivity, is remember that everything is a habit, right? We are not looking for heroics here. We're looking for habit building. And for habits to stick, you have to have rituals, you'll have to have consistency, and you have to have some sort of tracking what's going on. So rituals is you got to be really specific about what you want the organization to do more of. So if you want communication between manager and employee to become a lot better because you realize that that's something that's getting in the way of productivity, make the ritual everybody must have weekly one-on-ones moving forward, right? Doesn't matter if it's 5 minutes, 20 minutes, 1 hour. We need you to have weekly one-on-ones with each member of your team. And then you set up some consistency cues and simple rewards. You have their next level, whoever the manager is, their next level, have a check-in with them every few months to say, how are those weekly one-on-ones going, right? You could do something like that. You could ask them right then, put down, hold some space in your calendar each week to schedule your weekly one-on-ones. Do shout outs whenever you realize that some of the people are doing this consistently, right? Celebrate, but also focus on consistency because that is what creates habits. There's a there's a theory that says it takes about 21 times for something to become a habit. So if you do something 21 times in the way you want it to be done, it will naturally from there be done on its own, organically. All right. And then you want to make sure that you find a way of tracking adherence regularly. All right, so I'm going to move forward on a couple of these. I will have all of this in the deck that I send out, so do not worry. I do want to make sure that I have at least 5 minutes to answer any questions that might come up. So I'll land here on a couple of behaviors that from leaders that usually make things worse. And this is what we call like accidental diminisher behaviors. No ill intent, but these managers may be doing something unbeknownst to them that is getting in the way of creating clarity and highly productive teams. One is moving goalposts. We've all seen when priorities shift from from one thing to another. If you are not telling the why of why the shift happens, this kills throughput. It kills the productivity of your team because it feels like, why should I work towards something when it's very likely to move down the line? Another one is the undefined decision rights. Okay, one more time. If you don't have somebody that you know clearly and everybody else knows clearly is the decider for a reoccurring decision, you will have a lot of people looking at each other, pointing their finger at everybody else. That's the best case. The worst case is you're going to have some politicking going on when somebody decides and everybody else realizes, or everybody else thinks, why are they deciding? It should be me. A few more is when you don't provide enough feedback. When things get done and work gets done and there's no negative or no positive feedback to be shared, and you as the manager just think everybody knows what they should be doing, I do not need to be involved. You are the captain of that ship, and you need to tell people when things are going the way they should, even if it's a small thing, and when things are veering off track, even if it's a small shift. One more time, here's some of the things that you can do to mitigate some of these risks. We talked about RACI. Sometimes it could be theater, right? Sometimes it could be, we'll just talk about this and never talk about it again, right? So that's why you want to make sure that it's a document or something that someone can read and access at any time so that it is clear, and make sure that everybody has one deliverable to own. The risk here when you're trying to improve productivity is there's now way more meetings because you want more status updates, you want more, opportunities to talk and embed things. Try as much as possible to decide, make decisions in the room and replace your updates, which could be emails or chats or meetings, with dashboards. Dashboards that anybody could access, whether it's evening or weekend, and that live there. That will limit the number of meetings you need or even emails you need to share information and updates. Micromanagement can become a thing that comes up here when you double down on productivity. One way of mitigating that is to also help your managers become better delegators. And one rule of delegation that all managers should strive for is delegate a task to someone when you feel 60% confident that they'll get it done right. Don't wait until they're 100% confident because then nobody's going to fit that. And if they do, they should already be on the next role, not the one they're in. Think about 60, maybe 70%, because then that gives you an opportunity to coach them, but it also gives you some confidence and them some confidence to take on a growth opportunity. All right. And then documents need to be a living, breathing document, refreshed regularly and discussed frequently. So we do have a offer for all of you. We did this last time and we got a lot of great conversations out of it. This is all exclusive for webinar attendees, again, for our Management Fundamentals Bootcamp. I already talked about some of the things that we do. We essentially pull together insights from researching thousands of best places to work across America. What are the managers doing there to become great managers where their teams are effective, engaged, and productive? And we just did one recently, as I mentioned, and 99% of the managers in that room said, this training helped me become a more confident manager. We also have about 93% of managers recommending this training to other managers. So if this is something that you are interested in, you can take a picture of this QR code or just kind of put it up on your phone. It'll take you to a scheduling link to talk to me. This is the last time that we're going to be offering this since we are wrapping up and we have our calendar, or my calendar, since I'm the trainer, wrapping up and filling up quite quickly for the rest of the year. So if you want to have a training like this within your organization in 2025, we will bring down the price by 20%. Now, space is very limited. September and October are very popular months for the training. So if that's something that you're interested in, please book a meeting with me so we can talk about your needs and see if this is a fit for what you need and what you think would be helpful for your managers. Now, to wrap up, here are 3 things that I hope you commit to until the next time that we talk, which we'll have another one of this. We'll have another webinar in October, so I hope to see you there. Pick a focus. Pick something that, based on everything that we talked about today, you think would improve your team's productivity, that you want to work on and you want to measure. And next, think about where your management core currently is when it comes to this. Through either surveys or conversations or group meetings, how do you think they're doing right now when it comes to maybe having weekly one-on-ones or having clear roles through a RACI or a RAPID kind of charter, or by being clear at communicating the why behind the different initiatives and tasks they're being given? Doesn't have to be perfect, but gives you a sense of where you currently are. And then you create a plan to work on that using some of the tips that we talked about today. And if you want to talk more about it, I'm happy to have a conversation with you about it. But then more importantly, you set a public date to check on progress. This is something that we're going to work on for the next 6 months or 12 months or 18 months, whatever that is. Make it clear, make it public, and that will create immediate credibility for everybody else and also make you and all the people you're working with accountable for that. So thank you for your time. There's the QR code again if you want to schedule some time with me. And just remember, clarity is a choice that you can make daily. And I hope that you do. And I hope that you help your leaders do the same thing. So let me check QA now. Yes, we will share this presentation. So somebody asked, are you able to conduct a RACI with a smaller team? Oh, I think this is probably just for me, so I will reply to you directly on this one. But we can definitely discuss that. Thank you for your interest. And okay, so I don't see any questions. If you do, let me know. I will be here for the next few minutes. If you gotta go, thank you for your time. And until next time, have a great rest of your week. Take care.